Serie A, it's one of the best leagues in the world and home to Italian football and some of the greatest football teams ever, as well as some incredible atmospheres. And I got the chance to visit two Serie A games, Roma versus Hellas Verona and AC Milan versus Atalanta. Now I had seen both Milan and Roma play before against each other in the Europa League at San Siro. That was a brilliant game with a brilliant atmosphere, but I'd never been to the Stadio Olimpico. So for my first game of the weekend, that's where I went. After the early sackings of De Rossi and former Southampton coach Juric, Roma were now under the leadership of Claudio Ranieri, the man who won Leicester the Premier League in 2016. And they were on good form as well with a nice unbeaten streak going. So they were definitely favourites to win the game against Hellas Verona, but anything can happen. Now before we talk about the game, we have to talk about the atmosphere. Pre-match, it was brilliant. There were flares, loads of colour all around, flags, and a lot of singing. Take a listen. Anyway, the game kicked off and right from the start it was exciting. Roma were keeping the ball high up the pitch and only 5 minutes into the game this happened. Yep, Roma were 1-0 up. A fantastic dribble from Sula, finished off by Shomurodov. Couldn't have asked for a better start really. After that goal, the game did die down a little bit. For the rest of the half, it was mainly just teams trying to keep possession, playing a bit cautiously, and there wasn't really enough creativity in the attack. So after 40 minutes where there weren't really many chances, it was half time. So you know Lazio, the main rivals of Roma who play in the same stadium? Well, they lost to Bodo Glimt in a midweek Europa League game, and the Roma fans had some funny banter, for some reason making fun of them through Oasis song titles. I don't really understand that, but whatever. Still kind of funny that Lazio lost to a team that doesn't even have a badge on Google. But anyway, back to the game. In the second half, the match continues in a very similar way. Defensive football, a reluctance to go forward and take risks, and while there were despite a few more close chances than in the first half, it still felt like the game had been pretty dry since the first goal. And that first goal ended up being the last goal in what was one of the most boring halves of football I have ever seen. I guess you could say Roma were boring after scoring, which was a shame because the atmosphere was pretty good. And I can't complain too much because Roma won the game and that was good. I was supporting the home team obviously, but it was interesting to see a Serie A game where there weren't that many goals, and we saw an interesting style of play which involved really well organised, tight defensive lines, and a lot of the game being very physical, with teams trying to keep possession in the midfield. It was definitely an interesting experience, but not as exciting as I would have hoped after that first goal. Still, it was an enjoyable game, and there was another one coming up, Milan versus Atalanta. This is a fixture where Milan are usually the favourites, but this season they've not been doing very well. They're sat in 9th, while Atalanta sit in 3rd, competing for a Champions League spot. With players like Retegui and Lookman on great form, Atalanta were probably the favourites to win this, but you can't underestimate Milan at home at the San Siro. I've been there before and the fans are very loud, the ultras very committed, and it is a very special stadium to be in. So the game kicked off, and as expected, San Siro was really loud. It was looking like it was going to be a really exciting match. In the first half it was fairly even, and it was difficult to see who was going to win. There weren't that many chances, but it was still entertaining enough. Just watching a different kind of football to what I normally see was really interesting. Like the way both teams were kind of reluctant to throw any players forwards and would rather build up slowly to an attack. There were lots of stoppages for fouls and things like that, and most of the time both teams were either sort of squished into the halfway line, or there was one team keeping possession and attacking, but they were very keen to keep the ball and not waste it. In the Premier League it's a lot more fast paced, and I guess teams are prepared to take more risks. Anyway, then Leao went through on goal, but he was offside. And it was half time. Now early in the second half, Milan had probably the best opportunity of the game so far, but nobody could quite reach it. Very frustrating. But for the first 10-15 minutes of the second half, the Rossoneri were dominating. Not much of that was turning into chances, but they were definitely the better team during this period of the match. But then this happened. Atalanta scored and went 1-0 up, a diving header finish that put AC Milan in a very difficult situation. They now had to come back from 1-0 against a very strong defensive side, and that was something they seemed to struggle with for the rest of the half. There didn't seem to be that much urgency from AC Milan, and Atalanta were very happy to just keep the ball, keep the game going slowly, and hold out for the 1-0 victory. Milan really weren't having any chances. Fofana was in a good position here, but he misplaced his pass. I actually think he had a really good game, but overall Milan were just off the pace, and even while chasing the game they were still letting Atalanta have more chances. Lookman went through and had this very good opportunity. A great save from Maignan, but obviously not an ideal situation to be in the first place. So as you can see, Atalanta were actually looking more dangerous, which made it a painful watch from an AC Milan perspective. So into stoppage time, and Milan, I'll be honest, they really didn't put up much of a fight. Not enough urgency, not enough creativity, not enough players who can just take the game and turn it on its head. As you can see, a lot of fans had left by this point, and you can't really blame them. It was a pretty poor display from a team that's not having a great season. But as for Atalanta, this was a great result, a 1-0 win away from home. They look very likely to qualify for the Champions League again next season. So yeah, that was the end of my Serie A weekend, and I did only see 2 goals. Both games were quite boring, but the atmospheres were amazing. I'm not sure that's a completely accurate representation of Serie A, but from what I saw, it was quite slow paced. There were a lot of fouls, not really enough imagination on the pitch, but there was some good football in the midfield, really good defensive performances on display, so it was definitely very interesting, even if it wasn't the most entertaining in terms of the actual football we saw. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you think of Serie A, and I might actually start uploading regularly again. I'm not sure, I might. But subscribe anyway, because the worst case scenario is that you just unsubscribe later. And with that being said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.